Ready.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody is enjoying their, Wednesday afternoon. I've got some sun over here in Grand Rapids, so I'm hoping you have some sun
We
on
do.
the east side. Okay, good. Very good. So this is really an opportunity for us to spend a little bit of time together, for you all to ask whatever questions you might have as it relates to financials or anything else that I might be able to help with. I'm hoping that you were able to watch the 2 videos that were sent out late last week. So one was quite long, right? I mean, I can talk a long time about finance. It's just kind of in my blood. So there was a 45-minute overview just talking about the financials of the Shore to Shore organization, all of our entities. And that, again, went for 45 minutes. So if you hung through that with me, thank you. And then I also provided just a smaller snippet of an update just related to Cedars. And so just as a refresher on some of the items that I covered just before we jump into the Q&A, in the larger overview, I talked about some of our, and I shared some of our 2020 successes. So we all know that COVID has changed our world, everybody's world in 2020. And I probably should say before I get too much further, I am here today visiting with all of you from my home. So I've got 2 kids and a husband at home. So if you hear one of them, I apologize, but that's the life we live in right now. So anyway, back to what I was saying. I shared many of our successes that we've had in 2020. So even though COVID really has impacted us in 2020, we also were very, very busy on continuing to move forward on several different initiatives. One of those being the refinancing and co-obligation that I talked about. A lot of talk about creating consistent financial reporting, shore to shore, and really just a lot of that affiliation work behind the scenes, but creating that one financial team supporting Natalie and all of the other leaders that we have in the organization. So after the successes, I believe I walked through a few financial ratios, and those ratios were organizational wide ratios, and hopefully that gave you a glimpse of the financial picture of the organization and the pieces of the puzzle that go into the financial picture. And then I talked about the audit, and I also shared some year-to-date financial information. So it's just a high-level summary of what I talked about last week, but I'm really here today to answer your questions. So it's your time to ask me whatever questions you might have. So feel free. Looks like we've got maybe a Q&A. And so expand on the consultants and advisory for investment, their identity and cost. Expand on the consultant and advisory for investment. Okay. So what I'm thinking that relates to is the transition that we made from having individual investment advisors and custodians to one joint custodian. And we went through an RFP process for that, so that initiative was really led by the investment committee of the board. So of both foundation boards. So we have 2 foundation boards, and we have investment committees that report up into those foundation boards. Those, we had an ad hoc committee by investment committee members, and we sent out RFPs and probably got back, maybe 12 different proposals for advisory and custodian activities. And I believe that was like 1,200 pages of data that was reviewed by internal staff and our investment committee volunteers. And in the end, we decided to move away from both organizations, or all the organizations that either organizations used in the past, and moved towards SEI. And we're very, very happy. They were, by far, we felt, the top firm coming to the table. And they were also the cheapest, but that's not why we went with them. Is cost was absolutely a piece of the analysis, but it's only a piece. Without quality, cost doesn't get you very far. So if you want any more specific details on the actual percentages, I'm happy to get that for you at a later time. I just don't have those off the top of my head. So yeah, I hope that was helpful. Let me look again. Where is the central office? Really, really good question. That's a great question. So we have one corporate office, shore to shore. And those team members and the corporate office team members, which are made up of finance, my team, IT, HR, central supplies, sales and marketing, and then what we call senior ops, which is kind of the senior level individuals that are responsible for operations, which would be, for example, our COO, Lori Potter. So that's kind of what makes up our central office. We have team members through all over the state, actually, that are part of those corporate office. So it's not one sole location. We have team members that sit their office, or their offices that they'll go back to after COVID, are at CRC in Chelsea. We have individuals that sit in an office in Grand Rapids, a couple different locations in Grand Rapids. And I actually have one team member that sits in South Carolina. So we definitely have an on-site presence, but we also don't restrict it to one central location. So I think there was questions when the original affiliation came together is, will the central office, corporate office, be at a midpoint in Lansing, or, another midpoint? And we've also always said no, that it doesn't really matter where our team members sit, as long as we are available to provide the services that we need to provide. So I hope that answers your question, and there's not a plan to kind of have one central office anywhere. And if COVID has taught us anything, which I think it's taught us a lot, it's taught us that location for support team members, and I'm including finance and HR and IT, location is not that big of a deal. Now, there are going to be times where you need your information and technology person to be on site to put something together. But outside of that, whether you're working from home or South Carolina or Grand Rapids or Chelsea, it's the results that matter. So hopefully that helps. Okay, what is shore to shore? Oh, I'm so glad somebody asked that. I am so glad somebody asked shore to shore. I mentioned it on my video, but I know I talk fast sometimes. So we use the term shore to shore a lot within the organization. And if we step back to when we affiliated in March of 2019, we had United Methodist Retirement Communities, which includes Cedars of Dexter and Chelsea Retirement Communities. And then we affiliated with Porter Hills, which is on the west side of the state and has several similar type communities. And so we really span from, we have a community in Detroit that's an affiliate. We really span our communities from the east side of the state Detroit, the furthest, almost the furthest east you can go, right? All the way to Lake Michigan. And we have communities in Holland and Muskegon. So that's where we came up with the term shore to shore. We have communities and we serve individuals from shore to shore, from east to west. I know when we started out, we said, should it be coast or should it be shore? And somebody shared, there are no coast in Michigan, there's only shores. So that's why we call it shore to shore. So who is SCI? Where are they located? Are all of UMRC Porter Hills investments handled by the foundation boards? So I probably said SCI. I probably did because I tend to say that. It's SEI. And they're a national organization. I do believe their main headquarters are out of Chicago. And they handle the majority of the investments. The majority of the investments for the combined organizations do sit with the foundations, but not all of them. There's some investments that are outside of the foundations, but not a significant amount. So, yeah. Let's see. Oh, good. Somebody thought that my Zoom yesterday was okay, said outstanding, and answered some of their questions. So thank you for sharing that. It was a little tricky presenting to myself in my home, now without having any feedback and interaction, and even though I'm an accountant, at the core, I'm a people person too, and I really like to be with people, and so that was tricky to do that without any feedback. So let's see, has the aging of cedars been recognized in budgets for 2021? That's a really, really good question. I'm so glad somebody asked that. So let me just, if I can reframe that a little bit, just to paint the picture for everybody. I think what this question is asking is, as cedars ages, are we putting enough dollars into our budget to cover upkeep and maintenance and all of those things? And I absolutely, yes. We keep an eye on all of our locations and the age of our locations and how much dollars need to be allocated in what we call capital. And I say capital, I mean building updates, road updates, sidewalk updates, all of those things. And absolutely. And actually, I think many of you know Lori Potter, and Lori Potter, our COO, brings that up quite frequently, just to make sure that we have that on our radar screen, that we're thinking about as Cedars. I think all of us think that Cedars is young, and I think relatively speaking, the community is young, but I don't think we should get too far along without really thinking about that. And that's absolutely in our budget. Yep. Whether that be in our operating budget or capital, yes. So a prior CFO told us that 48 cottages occupied were the break-even number for Cedars. Your information suggested that it be 56. Well, that's a really great question. That's a pretty detailed question, and I appreciate that. I imagine that Steve's number is accurate. And so let me just double check on that. I'm happy to follow up. Something could have changed along the way to make it 58 to 50, or to have that change. But let me just double check. I'd hate to assume something right now and not know the answer. So Natalie, would you mind noting that down, that we need to follow up on that question? Thank you. Okay. What are the fees for the, somebody says 56 is accurate. Okay, thank you, Natalie. Natalie is on top of her game. What are the fees for the investment counseling? So that is a percentage of the total investments. And I believe, you know, I don't want to misquote that either. I'm happy to follow up with this group. Like I said, I know that it was, you know, the lowest cost and actually a lot cheaper than what we've been paying in the past. And it's cheaper because of the volume and spreading that expertise out over more dollars. So rather than me misquoting right now, I'd really like to follow up and if whoever's asking that specific question, if you can just send Natalie a note, and we'll get those get that response back to you. So thank you. Okay. Okay. There is a hand raised. Okay. There is a hand raised. All right.
I just called on someone from the audience. So if you would like to, I did answer that hand raise out there.
I unmuted it.
Hi, Pat.
All right, am I on?
You are.
I found the presentation very well done and informative. Got 3 questions.
Okay.
Under obligations for COVID-19, the obligations for COVID-19 was made. What is it and where is it recorded? And is it in payables or debt?
Yeah, so obligations for COVID-19. So let me talk through that a little bit. So we have many expenses related to COVID-19. We have additional wages, we have an additional supplies cost. All of those are running through our typical payables process. A lot of those have already been paid, right? So they're not an outstanding obligation. That's just part of normal operating. There is a COVID PPP loan, so that when COVID first hit, a lot of organizations were looking at these PPP loans to help with liquidity. And we were doing the same thing. I mean, most organizations like ours were as well. And so it was so much of an unknown when COVID hit in April, and how much of a financial impact that would have on our organization. So we did apply and were awarded a $3.6 million PPP loan. And that is recorded as debt right now, and will continue to be recorded as debt until that is forgiven. So we have to walk through a process and only spend those dollars on specific items. And that was all done. We've checked all the boxes, and now you just work through a process with your bank, with the SBA, to file for forgiveness. And so we're currently working through that process. So it will remain on our balance sheet and remain in long-term debt until it's forgiven. Once it's forgiven, that will come onto the profit and loss statement as revenue and come off as a liability. So I hope is that what you were looking for?
The second question, it was great to hear there were no issues on the audit, and that with all the things that have been accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
But were there any significant management notes?
Yeah, there was one. Mm-hmm. So you have the auditors look at reportable items in 3 categories. So the highest category is a material weakness. And what that means is there is a chance that the financial statements could be misstated and misstated materially. So that's kind of the highest degree. The second one is a significant deficiency. It's an item that needs to be reported to the board, but it's not going to materially misstate the financials or distort the financials to a reader. And then the lowest one is a control deficiency, and that is a smaller dollar amount of the significant deficiency. It's not as large of an item. So we did have one significant deficiency around payables. And what that was is just a timing of some construction invoices that didn't hit the balance sheet on a timely basis. But those construction invoices are a little tricky from an accounting auditing standpoint, is that those really don't have any P&L impact, no profit and loss impact. It's only a balance sheet impact. So yeah, with everything happening and with two organizations coming together and co-obligating, we were just fine having one finding. Going forward, I don't want to have any findings, but I'll take it for this year with as much as we had going on.
The last question you mentioned and spent a lot of time on benchmarking and the process. What source or sources were used for benchmarking?
Yeah.
Like Leading Age, is that a source?
Well, kind of. So Leading Age works with an organization called CARF, and it's CARF. I'm not going to remember what that stands for, but if you Google CARF, it's going to come up, CARF. And CARF is an accrediting association, and CARF works in many industries, but there's a CARF specific for our industry, senior care. And CARF works with Baker Tilly, who's a public accounting firm. And on an annual basis, CARF and Baker Tilly provide a benchmarking report of all of organizations within the senior care industry. And that are accredited, and rolls them up into these benchmarks. We also, so that's what was in that presentation, were the CARF benchmarks that are coming from CARF and Baker Tilly, and they're updated annually. We also utilize benchmarks from Ziegler. Ziegler is a well-known investment banking firm, and they do a lot in our industry, a lot, and they're national. And so they do a lot of benchmarking as well and provide a lot of good data. And that's another source. That's not a source that I provided. I didn't want to, it was a lot of financial data just to start with. But those are our two primary sources of benchmark data, is CARF and then Ziegler.
And these benchmarks then are for not-for-profits?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great questions. Thank you. Thank you for your interest. There was one here. Let me see. Please expand on the pie that is designated depreciation and amortization for interest. Yeah, that's always a little bit of a tricky one. So let me look at the slide here. Yeah, depreciation is 23% of your total expenses, and wages are 24%. So it's a big component. And sometimes, CFOs or whatnot don't provide depreciation. And I'm not sure if information around depreciation. And I'm not sure if Steve has in the past, and it's not right or wrong. I like to be as transparent as possible and provide the information. And if we have to talk through it, that's okay. But I'd rather provide it than not, and just be transparent. So there's nothing wrong with it. It's just, it's an expense, but it's a non-cash expense. So we're not actually writing a check for this. So let me walk through what this looks like. When we buy a building, let's say we buy a building for $100,000. Buildings are typically, from an accounting lens, buildings last 40 years. Buildings can last a lot longer, but there's some accounting rules that the accounting rules said that every building lasts 40 years. And so you take the expense of that building in and the wear and tear of that building in over the life of that asset. And that's what ends up on your P&L as depreciation. So again, I'm not writing a check. You're basically taking the value of that asset and bringing it onto your P&L. It's the wear and tear of your house. And so why do this? Why do these crazy accountants do this, right? Like, why make up this silly stuff? The goal is you want a P&L impact of that because you should be funding something. So let's say I'm going to just put, it's $200,000. I thought I was close to $200,000. $200,000 of depreciation. That means that you've had $200,000 of wear and tear and aging on your assets, right? So some organizations have a funded depreciation. So for that, every $200,000 that's wear and tear on your assets each year, we're funding a cash account with that money set aside so that when the time comes and you need to reinvest dollars, that money is available. We don't necessarily have a funded depreciation account. That's kind of an old school term from an accounting standpoint of funded depreciation. But we do look at, there's many ratios that we can look at to say, do we have the dollar set aside, the appropriate dollar set aside to cover that, for lack of better terms, deferred maintenance. I'm not saying there's any deferred maintenance on Cedars, but that's really the logic. So I hope that was helpful. It is a tricky accounting thing, and I'm happy to, continue to talk about it and continue to frame it in different ways so that it's easily comprehended. So, okay, with savings interest rates so low, yep, they're very low. Explain why you were thrilled to obtain a rate just over 4% for UMRC Porter Hills. Well, these are great questions. These are great questions, Natalie. You have a great group here. A very good group. Okay, so yeah, so I can understand how you're trying to make that connection of the interest rates that we're getting at our banks, right? That are like zilch, and the interest rate we're paying on our debt. We need to remember that when investment buyers go out to purchase bonds, they're evaluating the industry overall and the success of the senior care industry, in addition to the individual organization themselves that they're buying the bonds for. So, the interest rates that we're looking at the bank that we're getting, which are like nothing, that's going to take into account all of the industries, every industry. But when we're looking at just senior care overall, there's the borrowing rates are going to be different by industry. But so it's not an exact apples to apples comparison. So a 4% interest rate was an amazing interest rate for that time. we thought interest rates were good back in December and January pre-COVID, and then they shot up and nobody wanted to be in the market in March and April. And we were wondering what that was all going to look like by the time our deal rolled out. And our investment banker said we could not have hit the market on a better day. So the investment transactions that came after us and came right before us were not as solid as our investment transactions. So it's tricky. But that's a great question. It's a solid comparison, but not exact science, because you have to look at the industry specific. So I hope that was helpful. Great
Am I
question.
able to call on another hand, Kim?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I should have Naveen unmuting in just a moment, unless she ended up typing her question. We'll wait just a moment.
I didn't mean for my hand to go up.
Okay.
It's so tricky. And the mute button is so tricky. We say that we need shirts that say, unmute yourself or hit mute or something, So.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we got all the hands here. And we're up to date on the questions in the Q&A right now. But I did get some email comments on the presentations to Kim that they were very informative and very clear. So lots of grateful people to have that knowledge shared with all of us. And me too, it was interesting.
Did you hang on all 45 minutes, Natalie?
I did.
Sometimes I don't even like talking about finance, but I do. You all have a great leader. I know you know this, but I know from my perspective, Natalie is top notch.
Great support around us. Great support.
Yeah. Repair and maintenance question. Oh goodness. I don't know if I can try.
Let me see, maybe Marge would like to, I don't see the hand raised, but let me see. Marge, I will call on you. Did you want to ask something live, Marge?
Yes.
Hi, Marge.
Hi. On the Cedars of Dexter financial model, there's a repairs and maintenance line item. And over time, over the years, the issue of maintenance, let's say some painting jobs around windows or doors or whatever, there have been times when some maintenance requests were dealt with by saying, gee, we just don't have the budget to cover that. And then there are some repairs issues that are done sort of en masse, that like the replacement of the water heaters. So my question is really in the repairs and the maintenance, is in the budgeting process, is there any explanation of what kinds of repairs get dealt with one by one versus the kinds of repairs or maintenance that gets dealt with en masse?
Natalie, so let me just answer that one just a little bit, and then I'm going to hand it over to Natalie. And so just from a budgeting process standpoint,
Yeah.
so when we budget for any and every community, that budget process really starts with the executive director. So in this case, Natalie, working hand in hand with a member of my team from the finance department, really going line by line on their budget and discussing what has changed, what hasn't changed, what do we need to think about, what did we kind of have in our budget tickler file, right, that we've been talking about throughout the year that we need to make sure that we get in. And so I just want to make sure that that's known, that it's sometimes in some organizations, the budgeting process can just be done by the finance department, right? And it pretty much just gets handed to the EDs or the operations. And that's not the way we do it here. We do it very, very collaboratively. So Natalie, from a specific line item, the repairs and maintenance, maybe you can respond to that.
Yeah, and I think, there's a big difference between things like water heaters and window washing. So, there are certain things that are on a preventative maintenance schedule. So, thinking of something like a water heater, its lifespan is going to be about 10 years. So, if we're experiencing issues with certain things and those are happening over and over again, it's less risk, or it's more of a risk for us to just wait for something to happen, which is why we would in turn perhaps replace all of the water heaters. So using that example, we were looking at their lifespan of 10 years, so we went ahead and did replace those. And so those kinds of things we can plan on a schedule on, 5-year, 10-year, 15-year, 20-year, things like appliances, water heaters, roofing, those kinds of things. You kind of have an idea how long they will last, which helps us with those budgeting planning for that. Now, something like, window washing or power washing, things like that, that we hope to do annually. Sometimes we have months or quarters where we have to compare expenses and really determine what is going to be the most important things to do this month or this quarter. And so some decisions are based on that and, what's going to be the most responsible use of our dollars this month. So those two examples are good examples, and two very different examples. And, hopefully that helps you understand how we kind of come to the decision making on things like that. So, sometimes it is a balance of what are our other expenses this month or for the remainder of the year. And other things like appliances or water heater, something like that, we have planned to replace them. So there could be dollars set aside for something like that.
Okay, I was thinking in terms of the replacement function. I mean, some of the cottages have been here now quite some time, and some of them have had more or less wear and tear on the exterior by the location of where they are, how the weather and everything hits them. So I was thinking in terms of what are the competitive forces, so to speak, of how we get something either planned replacement or wait till the emergency, occurs. And what are the competitive line items that, there's a kind of tension between all of those line items. What is the primary competitive tension with the repair and maintenance? Is it lack of manpower or lack of, it's not long-term planning, because you obviously said you have that factored in. So I was just thinking about them, because over time we've gotten, as we've asked questions, we've gotten varying answers. Most of them carry some common sense along with them, but some of them seem like, gee, is this really people are planning, or is it better, is it easier, simpler, less expensive just to let it fall apart and then replace it? You know, so.
Yeah, that's probably not the view of the organization. We'd rather not do that. We'd rather plan appropriately, and take care of our investments in a very prudent, responsible manner.
Mhm.
So I can.
Yeah, and I can't answer, of course, for what happened in the past here
No.
at Cedars. So that I can't speak to what happened BN before Natalie, but but Jim and I tried to do our best to look ahead to see in terms of in the next year, the next 2 years, up to 5, 10 years, what is really on that list in terms of replacements. But what are those needs in terms of immediate needs or in the next year, even if it's not replacement, but, you know, maintain. So we do try to, you know, do our best to forecast and make sure that we have those bases covered. Maybe there's some history I don't know about though, Marge. I don't know if I'm fully answering your question.
Well, you're at least telling me how, as long as you're here, we can look forward to that kind of behavior coming from the from you folks. We sort of know where you stand. I mean, you've explained that very cogently. So,
Marge, I can remember a time in another community that it was a year that we just had so much snowfall and it was so cold that we had so much more expenses related to everything related to worse weather than what we had anticipated or that we had had in several years. So more snow plowing, more utility cost, more staffing cost, all of those things. And I remember having to adjust in different areas for that, as we had to endure additional cost. Just, sometimes nature just gets in the way of things or doesn't. But yeah.
well, that clearly affects some of the landscaping issues.
Yeah.
What kind of a winter with the winds, when we had those terrible, terrible winds 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we're sitting here looking at these trees and the woods sort of just flowing back and forth, you begin to think, we hope we've planned well.
I know. When we build a budget and we collaborate and we spend hours and hours and hours to build a budget, we always know that that budget will be wrong, right? Oh. Because we can't control nature, we can't control people, we can't, all of these things that the accountants want to control and want to make sure those numbers are right on, right? And the actuals come right to budget. We know that it's not going to be perfect. And so being flexible and yin and yang, I'm not saying that right today, but you get the point. Just being flexible. But I appreciate your question. And I think Natalie appreciates your question too. And hearing that just encourages us to continue to focus. Mm-hmm. So
I do want to call on a hand out here. One of our friends out in the audience.
Hi, everyone. This is Nicole Mag. So we've had an opportunity to meet over Zoom a couple times. Natalie invited me a couple months ago to do an operational update. And Marge, your question, I think, was a really great one. So I just wanted to add a little bit on to what Kim said. And your point was, what is the tension? What is the tension to equipment repair, that line item in the budget? And I think Kim started to kind of explain this, but I think part of the tension that's important to remember is the revenue and the occupancy. So at the beginning of the year, we set what our occupancy for the community will be, what the % increase will be. We all know that we want to keep that % increase reasonable for our residents, and that they have that expectation that we will have very reasonable increases to rent. So I think that can become the healthy tension to equipment repair and maintenance. We would love to repair everything and have it in pristine condition all the time. But I think if there is a change in expenses, like Kim mentioned, maybe we have a ton of snowfall this year and our snow plowing costs are more than we expect, then that can kind of cause us to readjust in equipment repair and maintenance. Or if we have a lower occupancy than what we expected because of maybe a global pandemic, those things are the healthy tensions, I think, that can pull on that equipment repair and maintenance line item in the budget. So I just wanted to highlight that not only are we budgeting expenses every year, but we're budgeting the revenue based on occupancy and the percent increase that we think goods and services will cost for that coming year. And I think COVID's a great example of that. We could have budgeted thinking that goods and services would cost X, and they could have exponentially cost more this year. So we wouldn't have as much to spend in that budget. So I just wanted to add that and say hello to everyone out there at Cedars of Dexter.
Thanks, Nicole. Okay, we have, when are furnace repairs, air conditioners planned for replacement?
So we can't sit here and definitively say a timeline for something like that, but what we do have in terms of our planning is just kind of an idea, a guideline of how long the lives of those things typically are. So my best friend here, Jim, is not with me, but he would be able to tell you kind of a guideline of how long something like that lasts and kind of when we could expect to start doing something like that for furnaces or for air conditioning. I will say that there are some air conditioners that have already been replaced here at the Cedars. So, you know, it's kind of, if we start to notice patterns of things is when, you know, our ears really perk up and we start to investigate a little bit more. But that's why we document all of those things, and we document, you know, when anyone's air conditioner has been worked on, for instance, and that, you know, kind of helps us determine. But we do have an idea of a schedule, but I don't know that off the top of my head right now, but I can certainly follow up on that. I don't know if we have any more hand raises right now. Doesn't look like it. Do we have any other questions out there?
Natalie, you have this so well organized. You're the master
I'm
of
looking in a few different places here.
Yeah.
I've had way too much experience with this lately.
Yeah, you're doing a great job. So I just want
to,
before we wrap up, I just want to share with everybody, Natalie, I'm sure has my email. If you ever have a question, she has my email and my phone number, and feel free to reach out. Natalie and her team, they're with you every day. They're going to be able to answer, you know, all of the detailed questions, and they're your first go-to, but you can also come to me with any financial related questions. And if I need to loop Natalie in, or if Natalie needs to loop me in, you know, we work very fluidly like that. So I like to say my door is always open, but in COVID, that's probably not the right thing to say. So, but there's always a way you can get a hold of me. I sure do wish that I was there in person with all of you. And I know we're all keeping positive thoughts around next steps for the vaccine and what that looks like for everybody. So we all just need to stay positive and hopeful, and we're gonna get through this. And so hopefully very soon, or in the next 12 months at least, we'll be together in person. But I really appreciate this opportunity to spend a few minutes with you all virtually.
Thank you, Kim. We appreciate you here at the Cedars. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye.